When I was growing up, I had many heroes. I had hockey heroes, I had movie star heroes, and I had scientist heroes. Linus Pauling was the one. Linus Pauling, probably the greatest scientist of the last century, certainly regarded as the greatest chemist. He laid the foundations to the chemical bond. He was the first one really to talk about molecular biology. He unraveled the mysteries of sickle cell disease, showed that it was due to a faulty protein. Anyway, he was an amazing man, double Nobel Prize winner. To this day, the only person ever to have won two unshared Nobel Prizes. But the reason that most people know about him is not because of his chemical contributions, it's because of his connection to vitamin C. And I remember back in 1970 picking up this little book that Pauling had written. And by this time, I knew a lot about Pauling. I had, obviously studied his chemical ideas. And then I read this book, and it seemed really quite curious because this was from a man who had published hundreds of peer-reviewed research articles, but this was purely anecdotal, based on his own experience and that of his wife. But because Pauling was big, researchers began to study it. And it turned out that they just couldn't duplicate Pauling's anecdotal experience. And to this day, it's still somewhat controversial whether or not vitamin C is a benefit to the common cold. Some studies have suggested that if you're really stressed, if you're out in the cold, in the Arctic somewhere and your immune system is down, you might benefit from C if you get a cold. But for most people, no. But anyway, Pauling then went on to make other claims about vitamin C, for example, in the treatment of cancer and treatment of heart disease. And because he was Linus Pauling, double Nobel Prize winner, other researchers said, okay, well, let's look into this. I mean, even though there wasn't much evidence, if Pauling says so, it was worth studying further. But to this day, we really don't have any concrete evidence that vitamin C treats or cures not only common cold, cancer, or heart disease. It, however, is absolutely necessary to have a certain amount of vitamin C to ward off scurvy. Now, these days, of course, we don't get scurvy, but that used to be a terrible disease. When Jacques Cartier first came to Quebec, almost all of his men suffered from scurvy because they didn't eat any foods that contained vitamin C. But the Indians actually, well, I guess maybe we should call them natives, at that time, gave him some advice. They said, take the leaves of this tree and boil them in water and give it to your men. And he did, and the problem resolved. Today we understand why, because tree leaves contain some vitamin C. So for scurvy, there's no question vitamin C is beneficial. But I think it is better to get our vitamin C today from foods rather than take supplements, because we just don't have evidence for the supplements. What foods? Well, everyone thinks of citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, limes. In fact, the reason the English are called limeys, because back in the 1800s, a Scottish physician, James Lind, showed that on long ocean voyages, when sailors were given limes, they didn't come down with scurvy. But there are other sources that are excellent, and they have other nutrients as well. I like broccoli. Broccoli is very high in vitamin C, and it's got all kinds of other beneficial chemicals as well. So if you're interested in your vitamin C intake, go for the broccoli. Of course, you can have your citrus juice on the side as well. But when it comes to vitamin C and the common cold, well, the jury is kind of in on that one, and there's not a major effect.